Are we in a civilizational collapse? By most metrics, yes. So, how do we avoid it? We choose option 3. Hello everyone, Mark Heck coming to you from Costa Rica. Now, if you haven't seen my previous video on this subject titled, Are We in a Civilizational Collapse? You should go see that first. But if you really don't want to, I'll give you the quick synopsis here, and then we'll dive in. All civilizations collapse, but there was one that managed to do it without the usual chaos, death, and destruction that overcame pretty much everyone else, which was the Eastern Roman Empire, aka the Byzantine Empire. Now, this was according to the famous collapse researcher Joseph Tainter, a professor at Utah State University, well known for his expertise in this field. The Eastern Roman Empire sort of voluntarily chose to simplify. They chose option 3. Option 1, do nothing, and option 2, hope for a technological fix, didn't work out so well for everyone else. But option 3 was good, and it's what we could call strategic simplification. Now, the big question here is, could our current global civilization, with all the signs of impending collapse, do strategic simplification like the Eastern Roman Empire? And if so, how do we do it? Well, first we have to understand that according to Tainter, civilizations are defined by two important things: complexity and energy. As civilizations become more complex, they expand, and as they do, they use increasing amounts of energy. This leads to problems such as environmental destruction, centralized authoritarian control, and bureaucratic bloat, to name just a few. At their maximal point, the civilization is forced to revert back to a simpler state of being. This tends to happen pretty quickly, with a lot of pain and suffering. Tainter, in his academic way, prefers to describe it as an involuntary rapid reduction in complexity. Strategic simplification, on the other hand, is an attempt to slow the process by simplifying on purpose, averting a hard collapse, essentially. Now, there are many people that have been pushing for simplification in one form or another for a very long time, but to no avail. And one of the really big problems, is that unfortunately, they've been focusing on the wrong thing. They've been focused on energy. Now, environmentalists, for example, like Paul Ehrlich, Naomi Klein, and David Attenborough, and countless others, have been arguing for decades that if we just reduce the amount of energy, we'd fix the problems. This thinking has led to policymakers around the world to attempt to do exactly that, try and reduce energy use. And how would you theoretically do that? Well, other than outright restrictions, you'd probably try to make things more efficient. The assumption is that if something is more efficient, like cars getting better gas mileage or buildings using less energy for heating and lighting, then overall less energy will be used. But this is totally wrong. We know that any time efficiency increases, there's a corresponding increase in total energy used, not less. And the reason why this happens is explained through a number of paradoxes: Jevons paradox, Bray's paradox, Parkinson's law, and so on. I'm not going to get into that here, but suffice it to say that gains in efficiency counterintuitively lead to an increase in overall energy use. So that's not good. And to add to the wrong thinking, we have the social dimension as well. There's those people who argue that, well, fine, if those evil, greedy humans won't reduce their consumption voluntarily, then we need to change humans themselves. We need to make people into better human beings. But the human condition is all of our emotions, from greed to hate to courage and love. Denying any of these aspects is incredibly self-destructive. It is a form of self-loathing, and self-loathing is the cruel path down which every atrocity has marched, from the gulags of the Soviet Union to the killing fields of Cambodia. Now, this hatred of self and humanity always fails in the end. Why? Because both it and the efficiency crowd are focused on the wrong thing. The real issue is not energy or human nature. The real issue is complexity. It's complexity that creates an increase in energy use, not the other way around. So to avoid dramatic collapse, we have to reduce complexity. And how do we do that? Strategic simplification. Okay, so I'll give you 3 principles of strategic simplification, but definitely feel free to add more in the comments. So principle 1, this may sound obvious, but it's not. The principle is about the maintenance of low complexity. If you already have something that is low in complexity, keep it that way. It's the good old KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. Some groups figured this out and embedded it into their social doctrines, religions, taboos. I'll give you an obscure but interesting example. We often think about the Amish and the Old Order Mennonites as a bunch of people who roam around on their horse and buggies and kind of shun technology. Modern day quirky Luddites, if you will. But there's something in their story that is underappreciated. They strive to be self reliant, not dependent on the outside world. And on the surface, that appears to mean a rejection of modern technology. But that's not quite right. Some Amish and Old Order Mennonites will, in fact, use internal combustion engines if they're stationary. If they're mobile, they won't use them. And at first, that seems odd. Like, why would they have that rule? Stationary is okay, mobile is bad. But if you think about it, stationary engines can be very useful, like in a machine shop for bandsaws and lathes and sanders and so on, which are great for, say, making furniture. The internal combustion engine increases productivity. But if civilization collapsed and they could no longer use those gasoline or diesel-powered engines, it wouldn't take much to pick up the old hand tools and carry on. Would it slow things down? Sure. But would it fundamentally alter the way they live? No. They'd still continue making furniture. A mobile engine, on the other hand, aka car or truck, has a nasty habit of expanding its dependency. A Sunday drive turns into a house in the suburbs, which turns into long commutes, which turns into driving tens of thousands of miles every year in a machine with 40,000 parts on a system of roads that relies on some distant government to keep it all going. So if the civilization collapsed, they couldn't replace the vehicle with a horse and buggy at that point. They'd be too dependent on long distances that only a vehicle could cover. So they just say, hey, why bother owning a vehicle in the first place? Keep it simple. I'm not saying everyone has to live like the Amish or Old Order Mennonites or anything like that. That is definitely not what I'm saying. This is just pointing out that some people have realized that maintaining low complexity in certain areas of life works quite well. They would hardly notice a massive change in civilization. Now, for the rest of us, when decisions arise where we have to choose between adding complexity or doing nothing, doing nothing is usually the better option. Keep it simple. Which brings me to the second principle. Reduce complexity as soon as or before it becomes unaffordable. This again may sound obvious, but it's like a form of living within your means. If you don't have the ability to live beyond your means, then stop doing it, or bad things happen. And this is one of those principles that the Eastern Roman Empire actually paid attention to when others didn't. When complexity became unaffordable for the Eastern Roman Empire, they realized at one point that their biggest expenditure that they could not afford was their full-time professional military. So they got rid of it. Now they still had defense needs, of course. So they created a citizen army instead, where most soldiers were full-time farmers who could be called upon to fight as needed. It saved them a lot of resources. In fact, getting rid of their professional military at one point helped stave off total collapse. So principle 2, when complexity becomes unaffordable, deal with it. Principle 3, decentralization. Civilizations expand and contract, and when they contract, they dissolve into smaller units. Now, smaller units are better able to manage themselves at this stage than the large centralized governments. This process can be fought or it can be accepted. The Alberta independence movement is a current example, with some Albertans saying they want to become a smaller self-governing unit. It will almost certainly happen, not because people want it or not, but because it's part of the decentralization process in play right now as civilization begins to unwind or to decentralize. So when Alberta goes, we will all be asking, how far does this centralization thing actually go? And the answer is as far as needed until equilibrium is found. And the answer is usually hiding in the tax roll. As long as the cost of complexity rises and appears to the average person in the form of taxes, citizens will weigh their options. And there comes a point when people, especially the periphery of the civilization, choose to abandon the whole civilizational project and go off on their own. Some even choose to allow an enemy invader in simply because the cost to do so is less than the cost of continuing to pay high taxes to the central authority. So we can expect that eventually Alberta will go, and the rest of Canada will almost certainly break down into smaller regional units as well, as will the United States and Mexico, and so on and so on. Let's not bring up Europe in this. That's just way too much. Okay, but otherwise, there you go. 3 principles: maintain existing low complexity, reduce complexity, and decentralize. That's it, except maybe not quite so fast. Because as Radio Free Bezel podcast pointed out in the comment section of the previous video, there's a theory that a civilization will actually use all energy available to it, no matter what. So even if we were successful at reducing complexity, and thus energy, there'll still be extra excess energy left over. And if we don't blow it on something non-productive, we'll be tempted to use it again, so we'd better spend it. In the past, this excess energy problem was solved in all sorts of creative ways. Sending young men off to fight useless wars, overconsumption in potlatches, the usual sacrificial killings, of course, and more often than not, just a good old giant festival. Now, if this little theory holds true, and I think there's some debate on it, but if it does, well, it means that we got to spend down all the energy we have available to us. Now, I personally like the idea of a giant festival, but that's just my 2 cents worth. And since we're talking about anomalies, I should add just one more little uncomfortable side note. If we were not very good at this strategic simplification thing, and we did a hard collapse, well, it turns out those who survive, historically, end up being much healthier. Better access to higher quality protein, less donuts, that kind of thing. So, I think I've changed my mind. Trying to avert a hard collapse is a lot of work, and collapse itself isn't all bad news. So now that I think about it, I think we should just forget the whole strategic simplification thing completely. And we should probably just go with option 1. Let's just do nothing.